On today's episode of the Harrison Vapnek podcast, we're bringing on from the Palm Beach Post, Joe Schad, to talk a lot about the Miami Dolphins, them in the NFL draft. Keep in mind, this was recorded before the Dolphins made the big jump from 3 to 12 and from 12 to 6. So when we talk about the third pick, just pretend we're talking about the number 6 pick. We'll be talking about possible quarterback situation and what the future is for quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. If the Dolphins should get some receivers in the NFL draft, tight ends, Kyle Pitts, University of Florida. Also, going to talk about Joe, his days at ESPN, his time working in South Florida, and a whole lot more. Really fun interview with a great guy, Joe Schad, starting right now. I'm now joined by Dolphins journalist from the Palm Beach Post, formerly of ESPN and Newsday, Joe Schad. Joe, how are you doing today?
Doing well, man. Thanks for having me.
So, Joe, one of the lead reporters of all of the Miami Dolphins down in South Florida. So let's jump immediately to the biggest question, and probably all of Miami sports right now, the number 3 overall pick in the draft. That's 50 days exactly from the day we're recording this. Joe, I know no one really knows the team as much as you as a journalist. What are the Dolphins looking to do with the number 3 overall pick?
Well, assuming that Tua Tagovailoa is the Dolphins quarterback next year, and he certainly will be, unless they're able to somehow pull a trade for Deshaun Watson, who may or may not be dealt before the NFL draft, the biggest thing the Dolphins need to do is add weapons for Tua, and that means receiver. And I think the LSU receiver, Jamar Chase, who actually sat out last year due to the COVID situation, would be the top choice. Certainly the receivers from Alabama, and there are more than one of them, including the Heisman Trophy winner, Devontae Smith, would be considered. I also think if the Dolphins have any chance to move down a few spots and pick up a future first rounder or multiple future second rounders, that would be really in their best interest. And I think it's something they'll certainly explore.
Why do you think they prefer Chase over Smith, considering Smith won the Heisman Trophy this past year? He has the connection with Tua Tagovailoa. They connected for the game-winning touchdown in the 2017 National Championship. I know they've talked about the good relationship they've had. Why do you think they would prefer taking Chase over Smith?
Well, if you look at Devontae Smith, you see a guy who is not impressive physically. And the fact that he is so incredibly thin, skinny, almost emaciated. That's how small he is. I hate it. That word has a negative connotation, but he is very, very thin. And I think that any general manager would have a hard time looking at him physically and saying, you know what, that's the number 3 pick in the draft. I mean, now if the Dolphins pick him up at 6 or 8 or 10 or 12, maybe you can justify it by picking up more assets. But just to pick Devontae Smith at 3, I have a hard time envisioning Chris Grier, the Dolphins GM, doing that. Jamar Chase is much more impressive physically. He is stronger, and he might very well be faster. It's going to be interesting to see, with no NFL scouting combine, how fast each of those guys run, and also what Devontae Smith weighs in at, because Devontae declined to be weighed at the Senior Bowl. Sometimes I decline to be weighed, but it's not because I'm too skinny.
It's interesting because you would think that at the end of the college football season, after Devontae Smith had a record-breaking national championship after only playing in the first half, that he'd be the consensus number 1 wide receiver taken off the board. And then compared to Jamar Chase, who hasn't really played college football in about a year, people wondering what the rust of him. Obviously, he's an outstanding talent, had an outstanding season at LSU in 2019. If they were to move back, let's say 3, 4, 5 spots, would you be totally against taking an offensive lineman in that case? Because I know that Dolphins could be looking for another tackle, maybe someone like Rashawn Slater from Northwestern, or possibly if he falls, Penei Sewell from Oregon. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Dolphins sort of feel like they addressed their offensive line concerns in last year's draft. You take Austin Jackson in the first round, you plug him in at left tackle. You take Robert Hunt in the second round, you plug him in at right tackle. You take Solomon Kinley in the 4th round. You hope that he is, if not a starter at guard, at least a key reserve, the number 3 guard. Sewell certainly is a guy who, would be in the discussion to be in the top 5 or 6. And as you mentioned, Rashawn Slater also, who already had his pro day, although some people view him more as a guard because I guess his arms aren't very long. But I think that receiver is such a position of need. And also the Dolphins recently, in a swap of 7th round picks, picked up Isaiah Wilson, who was a first round tackle from the Titans last year. And obviously he's a little bit of a flyer, having created some off the field problems and only played 1 game last year. But certainly that creates some depth, even if Wilson isn't able to start immediately at right tackle. He sort of, at worst, solves your problem of being a very talented number 3 tackle.
Yeah, I think that trade kind of flew a little under the radar because it happened just after the Dak Prescott extension, because I think he does add some good depth to the Dolphins offensive line. Something I was possibly thinking about, if they do decide to trade back a few spots and they're sitting at the 8-9 range, possibly taking tight end Kyle Pitts. I know they have Mike Gesicki. I know they have a desperate need for wide receiver, but why not possibly take the risk at going for a guy like Kyle Pitts, who has the skills of a receiver, but can also block like a good tight end, and you can play him out wide or in the slot. Brian Flores coming from that New England culture where they had a great tight end in Rob Gronkowski. Would it be crazy to say that they should take Kyle Pitts in the first round?
No, I mean, if he is clearly the best player on Chris Greer's board at that time, it shouldn't stun anyone if Pitts is the pick. Certainly you can utilize him and Gesicki as a 2-headed monster, similar to what the Patriots, as you mentioned, once did with Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, who, in a pure coincidence, also once went to the University of Florida, where I lived for 4 years. I don't know if you know that, Harrison. I did not attend the University of Florida, but I had the college experience at a later age, which is highly recommended. I was covering the Gators for the Orlando Sentinel. It's my first full-time sports writing gig. And that was a terrific time, man, going to the bars almost every night. Sometimes I would stay home on Tuesday. Sometimes I would stay home on Saturday, but I went out a lot. And Kyle Pitts spends his time in the weight room. He does not spend his time at the Swamp Bar and Grill across the street from Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. But I went on a little crazy path there, Harrison. But
it's okay. We love going on crazy paths.
Yeah,
the University of Florida is a great place.
They just flood back, they just, I don't know. I have a daughter who, I'm going to have to take that Gainesville college tour at some point just so I can show her all things Gainesville.
Yeah, I have plenty of people my age, a lot of friends that attend the University of Florida, always look like they have a great time at, you mentioned the Gator, the Swamp Bar and Grill. I'm sure outside of Ben Hill Griffin Stadium after big Florida wins, I'm sure there's big parties outside of there. Back to the Dolphins for a second. After the 3rd pick, because they have another first-round pick, they have, I think, 2 seconds, 2 thirds. What are some other positions of need? Because, this team does have a couple of weeks to go, because we saw when they played against some of the best teams last year, they were a bit of a step short. What are some of the positions they kind of need to hit on in their 5 picks after the number 3 overall?
Well, last year, the Dolphins had opportunities to select a running back both in the 1st and 2nd rounds. And I think ideally they would have come away with a running back, but they didn't do that. They selected Noah Igbenogany, the cornerback. They selected Robert Hunt, the offensive tackle, just because they felt those were players that were harder to fill, positions that are harder to fill. And if you play fantasy football, which I did in years past, that there's this notion that you can always get a receiver, right? There's so many receivers available. But in the NFL, there's this notion that, you can always get a running back. You don't need to invest a high draft choice. You don't need to spend a lot of money in free agency. And certainly, there's a player like Aaron Jones from Green Bay, who the Dolphins could invest in free agency, the running back. But I think they're going to look running back. I think Travis Etienne from Clemson would certainly be a 1st-round option, either at 18 or on a move down, or with their 1st pick in the 2nd round, as well as Najee Harris, the Alabama running back, and also Javonte Williams from North Carolina. If the Dolphins can get one of those 3 players in the top 50 picks, and if necessary, maybe you move up a little bit using all the extra draft ammunition that you have from 50 to the top of the 2nd round, the bottom of the 1st round, to move up to ensure that this year you do not come away without a really good running back. So receiver and running back are really the top two positions of need.
Do you think come the second round or third round, they would possibly double dip at wide receiver? I know in the last couple of games last year, they were running guys like Matt Collins and Isaiah Ford, who they traded at one point, and Devontae Parker's always in and out of the lineup, and guys like Jakeem Grant is in and out. Do you think they could possibly in the second and third round double dip at wide receiver after they get a guy like Chase or Smith and some of these other guys that are falling in that late second round range?
Yeah, Kadarius Toney from Florida.
Gainesville again.
There you go. There's a Western Michigan receiver. There's a Purdue receiver. There's an Ole Miss receiver. All those guys would be in the mix as sort of like a smaller, more explosive guy. A taller guy would be Rashad Bateman from Minnesota, who's really talented. We'll have to see. You get the feeling that the Dolphins really want to make over their wide receiver room. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if there is, a lot of change. Ideally, the Dolphins would add a receiver in free agency, and then also multiple receivers in the draft, whether or not it's 2 in the first round, 1 in the first, 1 in the second, or 1 in the first, and then say 1 in the third who slides. There's almost always really good NFL receivers, kind of like your fantasy draft, who are selected in the third and fourth rounds.
Let's transition over to the Dolphins draft pick of last year, Tua Tagovailoa, the most talked about, I guess, probably the most polarized athlete right now in South Florida. Him and Jimmy Butler I would put at 1 and 2. But he had high expectations going into his rookie year. The second quarterback off the board, the 5th pick overall, was outstanding at Alabama, one of their all-time leaders in touchdowns and passing yards, and only playing about 2.5 seasons. And there were the flaws in his game were kind of exposed in his rookie year. There's an inability to move it around in the pocket, how he faced with pressure, his mobility, and there were some games he was even taken out in the second half, in the Raiders game and the Broncos game. And, the Dolphins missed the playoffs as a result. What do you think the future holds for Tua Tagovailoa in Miami?
Well, all of our futures are uncertain, Harrison, even yours. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
You seem to have a bright future, which is good.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, you seem like a pretty sharp young man, and you certainly know about the NFL, about the Dolphins, and you're onto something here with Tua, because you're onto something here with Tua because he didn't show as much in his first year as many would have liked, and I think part of that is he's trying to come back physically. We spent so much time focused on rehabilitation and not as much time focused on, strength. And so the Dolphins are hoping that in this offseason, he shows he can effectively throw the football down the field. That's really a point of emphasis for him. And, I think there's every reason to believe that he's going to be better. One of the things that all quarterbacks need to have success, whether it's in college or the NFL, is sort of an innate accuracy. Accuracy is one of those things that you sort of have or you don't have. And Tua has an uncanny ability to place the ball exactly where he wants to place it. He's not as big as the prototypical NFL quarterback. He's not as fast as the prototypical NFL quarterback. He's not as strong-armed as the prototypical NFL quarterback. But the Dolphins knew all that when they chose him 5th overall. So a little bit under the radar, a little bit of diminished expectations. But if, in fact, Tua is the quarterback next year, I think you'll see improvements. I really do. And I think the Dolphins will come to the conclusion, if in fact he is their quarterback by the end of next year, that Tua is good enough to win with.
Do you possibly think that one of the reasons we're kind of diminishing Tua and how he played this season is because the expectations we're now having for rookie quarterbacks? Because we saw in the limited time Joe Burrow played this year, he was pretty good. We saw Justin Herbert have a record-breaking season as a rookie quarterback. In the previous years, we've seen guys like Lamar Jackson and Andrew Luck and Russell Wilson and RG3 all take their teams to the playoffs as a rookie, and other strong seasons from guys like Kyler Murray and Deshaun Watson. Do you think it's possibly a result that we're kind of having these high expectations for rookies, and then when they have, one kind of not so great season, we're kind of pushing them to the side?
You're right in that we rush to conclusions in today's, culture. The Dolphins gave Ryan Tannehill 7 years, and it turned out that wasn't long enough. Sometimes coaches need time, sometimes players need time to develop, especially at the quarterback position. Because some players have rapid success, like a Russell Wilson, like a Deshaun Watson, like a Justin Herbert, who unfortunately for the Dolphins went one pick after Tua, it creates a lot of drama and it accelerates the pressure cooker. And that's something that, you wonder how that might impact how the Dolphins approach free agency spending, for example, because a general manager like Chris Greer knows that, they made the acceleration to 10 victories last year. The Dolphins didn't make the playoffs, but they need to make that next step. And the only way to do it is by adding more talent, even if you have to overspend a little bit.
Do you think that Greer and Flores get together sometime this offseason and call over Jack Easterby down in Houston and maybe get into discussions of a Deshaun Watson trade and they come to an agreement? How much in the realm of possibility is that a possible move for Deshaun Watson? Because they know how much they love Tua and they want to bring weapons around him and all these draft picks they have. But the opportunity to get a guy like Deshaun Watson, who is an unquestioned top 5 quarterback in the league, one of the strongest arms, great mobility. Do you think there is, a world that the Dolphins will trade for Deshaun?
Well, I think that, the Dolphins have a responsibility to explore the Deshaun Watson path. Certainly they and the Jets would have the most to provide to the Texans, who seem to be in no rush to trade Deshaun Watson. I mean, who would? So, I think, I'm sure Chris Greer has made the call. It seems like the Texans front office has no rush at this point to move Deshaun Watson. They're still hoping that he'll report at some point, whether it's for, training camp, whether it's for preseason, more likely early in the season, if not week 1. It seems like Watson is dug in. I do think eventually he'll be traded. It is my guess that he will eventually end up with the Jets or the Dolphins.
You think that trade will happen before the draft or after the draft?
My guess would be that Watson will be traded after the draft. Okay,
so this past Dolphins season, you mentioned they won 10 games, started, 1-3, went on a 7 wins and 8 game stretch, had some really good performances against the Rams, Cardinals, and Chargers in consecutive weeks. Kind of fell a bit apart at the end of the season, went 2-2 down the stretch against some good teams. Did this Dolphins season kind of live up to what your expectations would going into the season?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you make the kind of leap from tanking to 10 wins and playoff contention, you have to feel good about the progress and development. Obviously, it was a major letdown in the last week being routed by the Bills, who had benched multiple starters because of their clinched playoff position. So, especially with the expanded playoffs, it was a little bit of a letdown at the end for the Dolphins not to make the playoffs. They could have used that experience. And Tua did not shine in that last game. So, it really just is about a steady climb. The Dolphins still have one of the youngest rosters in the NFL. And so, they just need to take that next step now.
I want to hear your thoughts on this because I thought this was pretty interesting. I mentioned it earlier, a couple of times when Tua was struggling in games like Denver and like Las Vegas, where they came back and won that Raiders game, where they put in Ryan Fitzpatrick. Did you agree with that strategy at the time? Because I know you want to see Tua, to grow as a quarterback. And in those tough spots, that's where usually when you're facing your most adversities, when, you're most shot. I think what the Doc Emmerich quote is, adversity reveals character, something in those terms. Do you think that it was the right decision at the time? And do you think possibly going into this season, they should either bring back Fitzpatrick or a veteran quarterback for that same situation?
Well, I think that the Fitzpatrick-Tua dynamic worked well last year, but I think it makes more sense to sort of let Tua fly and escape that shadow of Fitzpatrick for this season and sign another backup quarterback, maybe a Jacoby Brissett or a Tyrod Taylor. Jacoby Brissett from West Palm Beach. Yep. Tyrod Taylor, a quarterback who the Dolphins have had an interest in the past. So I think, but you asked specifically about Flores' handling of the quarterback situation. Excuse me. I thought that in Flores' first year, he should have given Josh Rosen an opportunity to play at the end of the season. He did not. Obviously, it was because they knew that Rosen was not a part of their plans. The Dolphins' decision to move to Fitzpatrick in clutch situations almost as a relief pitcher should not give us the same message that they believe that Tua is not a part of their future plans. It was a unique situation. And Flores is kind of his own guy. He makes moves confidently, and they usually work out. So while it's okay to question them, and I do, and we will as journalists, we have to also keep in mind that most of his moves and most of his decisions have worked out.
Back to Flores, he's going to year 3. The first year was a 5-11. It's supposed to be a rebuilding year. I think 5 wins was a lot more than they thought they would have, especially when they got destroyed in their first 2 games by more than 40 points. And then this season, it's a 10-6. They're on the verge of the playoffs. Now he's going into year 3 where kind of the pressure is starting to build because he hasn't made the playoffs yet. They're starting to make a better roster. He's now has the third and fourth offensive coordinator in the 3 years as they brought in Eric Studsville and George Godsey to co-run their offense now. The direction that Flores is taking this team, what are your thoughts on the approach that he's kind of gone through in these first 3 years?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the co-offensive coordinators works out. Obviously, one advantage is that they can work off of the same language for Tua that he used in his rookie season. Godsey had a brief time as offensive coordinator of the Texans, was not especially successful, even though he didn't have star quarterbacks. He had, the likes of Brock Osweiler, Tom Savage, and who's that kid that was with North Carolina, and also the Dolphins briefly, TJ Yates.
Yeah.
And Studsville has never been an offensive coordinator. I would presume Godsey will call the plays, even though that hasn't been announced. We'll be speaking with Brian Flores in the near future. This, again, a bold decision to pass on hiring a proven, established offensive coordinator. Flores has had a lot of coaching staff turnover. He and the Dolphins made a bold decision to cut Kyle Van Noy after only 1 year into a long-term free agent contract. So, when they make a mistake, they try to clean it up quickly. And in general, I think that's a good philosophy.
Yeah, I think that they mentioned they cut Van Noy. They're kind of owning up to their mistakes. The question is if they're going to own up to the Tua question at all. Their NFL announced today the cap room is going to be 182.5 for this upcoming free agency class. Who are some guys you expect the Dolphins to go after when free agency starts next week?
Well, certainly the Dolphins will be looking at the receiver position. Kenny Golladay is a guy who is going to be available based on the Lions' decision not to franchise tag him. Running back will be a position of need. Aaron Jones from the Packers, certainly a player that the Dolphins will look at. If those players are priced too high, there's always going to be a handful of others. And I've written stories about each of those on the Palm Beach Post. You can go ahead and type in running back Joe Schad, Palm Beach. Stories will come up. Same for wide receiver, same for edge rusher. And we've broken it all down in terms of position by position. Certainly, the Dolphins could use a guy who can get to the quarterback. Some of those guys might just be priced too high. Maybe a Shaq Barrett from the Bucs goes back to Tampa on a $16 or $18 million contract. And the Dolphins have that in their budget. Generally, championship teams are built through the draft and not free agency. It's cliche because it's true, even though you have seen recent examples of teams winning, like the Patriots, with key free agent additions. And certainly, once you get closer to that championship level, it makes all the sense in the world to sign a few glue guys who have been there and done that. I don't think the Dolphins are in a position where they should be signing a handful of age 29 and older guys. They're just not at that point in their franchise development yet.
Yeah, I think it'd be smart to continue to build that defensive line. They have some good young guys there. Continue to work on those linebackers and just cut Van Noy. I think that'd be a good spot to sign in this free agent class. Let's go back in time. 2003, your first time covering Miami for the Palm Beach Post. You got some national attention for the Ricky Williams story on his drug use. Kind of taking back to then, because that was a time before social media, before the Twitter era. So kind of taking back to what that was like then.
Yeah, there was it was a long time ago, but from what I remember, there was an attorney involved. Who had represented Ricky Williams, and somehow he was involved in my ability to attain the information. So I remember when I contacted the National Football League saying that I had access to some documents that showed that Williams was in trouble in regard to marijuana testing. They were surprised. The Dolphins were surprised too. So I think the lesson there is, you never know where you're going to get important information. Oftentimes it'll come from, an attorney, an agent. Sports agents are attorneys, of course. Even though they negotiate the contracts, they are, trained attorneys. That was a long time ago, but I remember it was a very big story. I remember it made CNN. It was a big deal. It was a big part of the reason that I was able to launch my young journalism career. And I think, there was another story too involving Jason Taylor and being harassed. He and his family being harassed, something to do with racism. And I remember, to give you a little journalism story here, I remember that
always good for a journalism story.
It was the fourth string wide receiver who kind of tipped me off to that, a guy who I just befriended based on conversations about fishing and RV racing. And so I think the lesson here is that, you never know who's going to help you, break a story. It might be the lady who works at the front desk. It might be the guy who cleans the locker room. It might be the fourth string wide receiver. It's not usually going to be the head coach or the general manager. It might be, but oftentimes you get tipped off by people who are in the meetings. Maybe the coach gets fired, and the reason you're able to break the story is that the backup left guard no. And so he's in the meeting, and so he texts you, "Hey, they just fired coach." Well, okay. Who's your source? Well, no one would ever guess it was the backup left guard, right? But all that matters is that you have relationships with people who are in the circle. And so whether it's Ricky Williams, Jason Taylor, or the made-up example of the coach getting fired, you just want to give as many people a reason to trust, and respect you as possible, so that when news happens, you've positioned yourself well to break some of it.
Yeah, they've always got to do some good in sports investigative journalism. Definitely always got to have some good sources there. When your time at ESPN, you broadcasted almost 150 college football games for ESPN Radio between 2010 and 2015, the time that I was growing up watching college football. So many outstanding games in that time. What were some of the best games you remember calling?
Well, first I think about some of the best players that I was able to be on the field level for and be right behind the bench for. That's the kind of the coolest part, having been able to be yards away from players and coaches and listening in on their conversations. It's something that I'll always cherish. Gave me tremendous insight. I learned so much about football just from having that experience. But actually my first significant memory was in my first or second year. Texas versus USC at the Rose Bowl for the national championship. I happened to be, 2 yards away from Vince Young when he scrambled into the right corner for the game-winning touchdown against, Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, Pete Carroll, and USC. And I remember, it was very cool. I remember that Lance Armstrong, the very famous cyclist who would go on to much controversy, and Matthew McConaughey, the very famous actor, they were one was on one side of me and one was on the other. And I was looking at Matthew McConaughey, looking at Lance Armstrong, looking at Vince Young, looking at the Rose Bowl, and looking at the clock and be like, man, for a kid who grew up in Queens, New York, not really even watching college football, how did I get here, And the reason I got there was because I worked very hard in whatever I was assigned as a young reporter and as an intern, whether it was making photocopies of pictures that would go in the newspaper or answering the phones and putting high school scores in the newspaper. No matter what job you're assigned, no matter what it is, no matter how small a task it seems, you want to make sure that you do it as well as you can, because you might not think people are noticing, but they are. And so when the assistant sports editor at Newsday, who's in the corner office, likes the way I speak with people, whether it's reporters, editors, high school coaches, high school athletes, because he's been listening to me for 2 years, recommends me for a job in Orlando, it's because I didn't know he was paying attention to how I was conducting my business, but he was. So I went a lot of paths there, Harrison, but I enjoy talking to young people who are interested in journalism because there's so many things that I picked up along the way that I think can be helpful.
And next thing you know, you're at the Gator Swamp and Bar down in Gainesville. You also, so other than college football stuff at ESPN, you appeared on SportsCenter Outside the Lines, College Game Day First Take. Any good stories with some of the the top personalities at ESPN that you have to share?
Wow. It seems like a different lifetime ago. It's funny, like my 8-year-old daughter, like she wants me on TV, I did career day and she's like, make sure you tell them you were on TV, she thinks the coolest thing in the world is that I was once a judge on Cupcake Wars,
Okay.
It's like to her,
tell us about that. That's awesome.
It's so random. Yeah. Like it was the Rose Bowl edition.
I care more about that than the USC Texas game. How was Cupcake Wars?
My daughter does too. I would tell you that sort of like your podcast that went on for a long time. I'm just kidding. I'm teasing you. In today's society, I know that podcasts go for a long time. Yeah. That's just sort of the way it is. But when I was growing up, you did a 7-minute segment, but I'm just teasing you, man. It's totally fine. I'm enjoying this. Yeah, like my daughter thinks the coolest thing is to go on Netflix and search, Daddy's Cupcake Wars episode. The thing that disappointed me most, if you're familiar with the show, is that, they make it seem like, these 3 cupcake makers sort of like build their own sets along with the help of these guys who wear plaid shirts with like suspenders and have beards. They're supposed to be like the lumberman guys, or we're going to build this. It's totally fake. Like that doesn't happen at all. Like, so I guess the lesson is, sometimes what you see isn't really what goes on behind the scenes. So, the sets, they had to bring their sets and they had to actually build them in wherever they were from. They didn't actually make them on this. Yet somehow it was an all-day filming for one episode. It was literally from like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. It was like 12 hours to film like one episode. And I made like hundreds of comments and used like 3, and they were the dumbest ones. So, and people will do that to you on podcasts, Harrison, like, I'll do 30 minutes with you and then you'll take the one dumb thing I said, tweet it out. And then before you know, it'll be a blog on Pro Football Talk.
I hope Mike Florio doesn't take this, put that into context. How were the cupcakes? Were the cupcakes good? Were they good cupcakes? Did you actually get to eat the cupcakes?
I remember one of the cupcakes. So it was supposed to be stadium food. So one of the cupcakes had pretzel and bacon and mustard, and it was okay. That was okay. The one that was disgusting was the one that had hot dog parts on it.
That's not a big fan of hot dog parts on my cupcakes. I'll get you out of this because I know you're a busy guy. Got a lot to talk about with Brian Flores and Tua. We're both South Florida people. You're in Parkland. I'm in Boca, or not currently, but from Boca. Your favorite warm weather South Florida activity? Is it tennis? Is it biking? Fishing? What is it? Golf? What is it?
I should be a good golfer. I'm not. At the start of the pandemic, myself, my wife, and my daughter, we picked up bikes, and we've been using them a lot, and we really enjoy going on bike rides. It's been great, especially when, you had to wear a mask at all times. But if you're riding your bike, around the neighborhood, you could certainly go without the mask. And so during the pandemic, and so that was a great thing to be. You felt you had some freedom being able to ride the bike, and so I do enjoy that. I enjoy just going to the beach, man. And whether it's Hollywood Beach, Boardwalk, Fort Lauderdale Beach, we like to go to Marco Island. Marco Island is a good spot. We like good restaurants. But my wife said that we're never leaving South Florida. We met in Connecticut, in the Bristol, Connecticut area. It was very cold. It's usually cold. And so she said that we're never leaving. So I said, okay, that's fine with me.
I never really thought how much I would miss the South Florida weather when we have 2 weeks ago a polar vortex where it's negative 24 degrees, and down in Boca and Parkland it's 75, 80 degrees. And so, I think once you get there, you don't think you can ever leave. And when you're born there, it's a disadvantage.
And the way media is today, many or maybe even most jobs allow you to kind of live where you want, so there's a lot of flexibility in today's media, dynamic. There's a lot of people who are, covering things from far away from where you think you might have to live. So, that's maybe one good thing about the pandemic. We've all learned just how much you can do remotely.
Yeah, can certainly do a lot. And we could do this podcast remotely. That's going to come to an end to our podcast. Thank you, Joe Schad, for coming on and talking all things Miami Dolphins, draft, South Florida, your journalism career. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Harrison.
A huge thank you to Joe Schad from the Palm Beach Post for coming on and talking all things Dolphins, draft, his journalism career in South Florida. Joe's a really good guy. Follow him at Twitter, at Joe Schad. Next up on the Harrison Vapnek podcast, I think we're going to have on from the San Jose Mercury News, Dieter Kutenbach, going to talk about the recent 49ers trade, moving up to that number 3 overall pick. Originally, what Miami had, what Joe Schad was talking about, we're going to talk about the new team with that pick, Dieter, and see what the deal is with the Niners, who they're going to take, and much more. So stay tuned for that on the Harrison Vapnek podcast. Have a great day. See ya.